Yeah. So as usual, any questions or something you would like to convey to me or to everyone? So 2 days ago, we ended the session where I was talking about improper integrals, and I had asked you to have to give a thought as to how you would go ahead and consider when alpha is negative between 0 and -1. This would be an improper integral because x power alpha will not be bounded. Of course, even when alpha is positive, but not necessarily an integer and so on, how would you obtain this integral? And of course, you know the answer in your school, but how would you show that that is the answer based on the tools we have developed this semester, this course? Well, there could be some who have not even given it a thought, but those who have given it a thought and were not sure or any questions there, please go ahead and tell me, or chat box or oral.
Sir, so, oh, sorry, go ahead. Somebody else is speaking. Okay, sir, I thought about it and I have not fully fleshed it out, but I did have an idea. But I wanted to, so first we can prove it for integers that we can, or for positive integers at least, we can do it with the binomial theorem.
Okay.
Then for reciprocals of positive integers, we can do a similar approach to what we did last class with root x. We'll use that theorem on inverse functions, and we can show that the function is differentiable and find the derivative. So now, then we can use a chain rule to like differentiate x to the alpha for rationals and come up with the derivative for rationals. And then I was thinking we could use some continuity argument to show that the derivative needs to be.
Yeah, the continuity argument to do here is going to be tough.
Okay. Okay.
Up to rationals, what you said can be worked out on those lines. Yes. Yeah. So as Millen has put here, x power alpha is exponential of alpha times log x, and so use the exponential and log function and multiplying by constant. These three combination, if you do, then you can get straight away for x power alpha. Continuity will be tough to argue directly, but using what we have done with exponential and its inverse, namely log, and combining them is the easiest route that I can think of also. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I got it now. Yeah, this is nice.
Yeah. So for every alpha bigger than -1, even if it's positive, we can use the same technique. When alpha is positive, this will be, of course, a Riemann integrable, and we can obtain the integral that way. And when alpha is between 0 and -1, use that technique to obtain integral from a to 1 for a positive. And then argue that as a goes to 0, this object converges and you will get the answer. Okay. So you see, typically students perhaps at CMI or anywhere else who are doing a fairly sophisticated and standard course on analysis and so on, they want to forget what they have been taught in school, saying, oh, that was not precise. Now we are learning precise mathematics. Yes, you are learning precise mathematics, but you should try and coordinate or correlate with what you have been taught. Now, don't discard that. Okay. At least quite a few of those things you can now come out with a very proper proof thereof. This is one such example. Okay. So every now and then you should give a thought that, okay, you had been taught this, can we now do it here? Not everything will follow. Okay. So, and once you remember how to recall these kind of things, you can then do more generally, you can do, if you define the gamma function as so as I was saying last class, this thing is called a special function, one of the earliest special functions, and properties of that could be deduced directly through calculus or now using what we have learned in analysis. And so for alpha integers, now this one will, you can immediately get that if alpha is an integer, non-negative integer, you can get and connect it directly with factorial. Okay, using what we did, integration by parts formula that we did last class. Each time you can keep reducing this alpha by 1 and keep proving this. And once you do this, apply this to get this quantity. For this, you will use that gamma of 1 is 1. Something which is directly easy to show because gamma of 1 is just e power minus x dx. It's an infinite integral. So that's also improper. All these are improper integrals. In any case, because it's an infinite interval for integration, plus for alpha between 0 and 1, it is even at it's not even bounded near 0. Okay. Okay. I'm at, I'll just be back in 3 minutes. I'm just taking, I'll just be back in 3 minutes. Yeah, I'm back. Having come to CMI, I was waiting for my morning tea, and usually it is at 10:15. Today it was delayed, so I had to go and collect it after our class started. Yeah, so could you recall some facts which you were taught as just rules while you were doing calculus in school, class 12, and if you raise those, then I can think about whether we can prove it using our techniques or not. Otherwise, I'll come to one question which has already been asked about what we did with power series, term by term differentiation and integration, etc. For power series, how much can we extend that? That is the next question I'm going to do. So no question. So let us go to. So we had done that. There the series is converging. Say between minus r and r, then let me call that some other constant. We can differentiate term by term. Now, can you see that we can also integrate term by term? Anyone?
I think so, sir, because we could consider the power series x to the n plus 1 by x by n plus 1 factorial with the coefficient a n, and we could differentiate that.
Yeah. So one could show that that one is also convergent, and its derivative is this, and therefore using our now tools that we have developed, we can get that this is also integrable and actually integrable term by term. So this is only about power series, right? The question that had been asked one of the classes was, can instead of a power series, if you had just a sequence of functions and summing up, can we still claim something like this? So here is a question. Suppose Fnx is continuous for x belonging to, say, AB. For all n bigger than or equal to 0. And all this. So on the interval a to b, the nth one, fnx, is bounded by some number an, and the summation an is finite. You can see that the power series, if you write the nth term as fnx, then you can use this. Of course, power series, you already know the result, but now this is extending that. Okay, now yeah. So so suppose we define capital Fn over the same interval a to b. At a it is 0, and for every t in a to b, including b, we define it as an integral from a to t. Now, based on whatever is given to us, we can say that mod fnt is absolutely summable, and therefore define this is a proper definition. Ft is equal to summation n equal to 0 to infinity fnt is well defined in our rules that we have, because it is absolutely convergent. So this is defined, and so in other words, term by term differentiation. So we are no longer requiring that fn's are actually given by something power some constant times x power n by n factorial, and nothing like that. Each one is just a continuous function. Only it has a bound given by alpha n, and alpha n's are summable. Just using that, all this. And
Sir, the dt, I mean, it's just fn, right?
sorry,
Not
sorry.
fn dt.
Yeah, no dt. Yeah. Sorry. So firstly, these conditions tell you that ft is equal to summation fnt can be defined, and it's absolutely mod fnx is absolutely convergent. So this is well defined for t in AB. And basically, we are now going to show that integral of we are doing term by term integration, and once we show that term by term integration works, the whole thing will follow. right? Because then we already argued that this term by term integration is this is term by term integration of Fnt. So capital F will be term by term integration of the infinite sum Ft, and therefore Ft will be the derivative. So the whole thing is to show that an integrable means Riemann integrable. Our theorems are all based on so now Riemann integrable. How do we show something is Riemann integrable? We'll have to get hold of, given an epsilon, we have to get hold of a partition, right? There can be other approaches, but the approach which is natural in our way we are doing, there could be other approaches. But the one that comes up to my mind and which is natural is to somehow try to get hold of a partition based on, for each n we have a partition Fn for Fn. Now the difficulty is that if you are taking, let's say that if you are only taking a finitely many sum, let's first try to do that. And suppose these are all Riemann integrable, and G is equal to summation k equal to 1 to n. All these are defined on some AB. G is summation gk also on AB to show that G is Riemann integrable. Okay. This is fairly easy. If you think about it, you should be able to do so, because for given epsilon, get partition Pk for Gk such that UAB FKPK minus LAB FKPK is less than, given any epsilon, I can make it less than epsilon. Here I will choose it to be less than epsilon by, this is m. Our total number is m. So I will take it epsilon by m. Okay. Now.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, is the idea fairly something like this, that ultimately we take the refinement of all the partitions?
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
okay.
Exactly. So now if you take P to be common refinement of P1, P2, Pk up to Pm, so we have, this is a common refinement, and we had already done that. If we refine anything, so if this works with Pk, then this will work with P, and this will happen for every P, every K. So you can add up Fks. I should have taken no Fk but Gk here. There is no F in our this problem, but a G. Okay. So this one will tell you that UAB GKP minus LAB GKP is less than epsilon by n. And now when we take the sums, then upper thing for G will be less than equal to upper sums, sum of upper sums for GKs, and the similar thing for lower bound. So the difference between upper and lower bound for the sum is less than equal to the sum of the difference between upper and lower bound for each. So we will get m times this, and that is epsilon. So finitely many, okay, you can get partitions for each of them in such a way that when you take their common refinement, will work for the sum. This is going to be one of the steps in our infinite sum thing, but it's important to understand this first. And I'm going to keep this on the cursor, keep this on the screen, and want you to digest this. That given finitely many, we can always do it. You give me each one is Riemann integrable, take their sum, give a epsilon, I can always get one partition which will work for the sum. It's basically refinement of partitions for each GK. And we have to be careful in the way we choose epsilons. Now, one of the thought could be that instead of finite, if we have countably many, as in our problem, suppose each one we make it less than epsilon by 2 power m. The kth one is less than epsilon by 2 power k. The sum of them will still be less than epsilon, right? So that could be one approach we can try, but that is not going to work because finite union of partitions, finite refinement of partitions will give you a partition. But if you have countably many partitions, you try to get a common refinement, won't work. It will not be a finite set. Right? For example, if the kth one is like all things of the j by 2 power k, integer multiples of 1 over 2 power k, that is my partition at the kth time. You try to make a common partition, it will be all dyadic rationals. So while this epsilon trick will work even if you have an infinite sum, the problem is that if you have infinitely many partitions, you can't take a common refinement. It may work, it may not work. So instead of straight away giving you the final answer, I am trying to motivate and see how does one think about problems of this kind. Okay. So first step, finitely many we can manage. Now, one obvious way we try to do expand this from finite to countable, it fails. Okay, because and what will fail? What will fail is this. If m is infinite, this may no longer be a finite partition. Okay. So let's get back to let's for a minute go back to our original question. About what is, we are given something more on fn's. The nth term is less than equal to alpha n. So from here, what can we say? Let P be any partition. P be some partition. What can you say about L, the gap between for any partition P, how much will be the gap? Can we put an upper bound on the gap between upper and lower bounds? Anyone?
So 2 alpha n.
Correct. It is upper and lower bounds are differences at most 2 alpha n. So what this says is, given epsilon, okay, we can first choose n naught large enough such that summation 2 alpha n equal to n naught to infinity is less than epsilon by 2. So from n naught onwards, the upper lower bounds works without any difficulty. And that
Sir.
leaves us, yeah.
So shouldn't it be 2 alpha n into b minus a?
Yeah, so we have to multiply this by b minus a. Thanks. Wait, this is b times b minus a, sorry. And therefore, yeah. So that the gap between u and alpha from n naught onwards is always less than epsilon by, sum is less than epsilon by 2. So now our path is like this, okay, that from up to n naught we can control by this trick, and n naught onwards we have control by that trick. Yeah. So now, remember, in any such proofs involving epsilons and n and deltas and such things, the sequencing is the most important. Because if you don't do it properly, things are not going to work. So first choose epsilon. That will give me given an epsilon, I will choose the n naught so that the alpha n's from n naught onwards are small enough. How much? we have now figured out how much we want it to make small. And then we have that upper and lower bounds for n naught onwards. Their sum is less than epsilon by 2. So before we move on, we can get that, therefore, writing G equal to summation n equal to n naught to infinity Fn, gap between U, A, B, G, P minus L, A, B, G, P is less than epsilon by 2. For any P. Now, for 1 less than equal to k less than n naught or 0 less than equal to k, our thing is starting with 0. So 0 less than equal to k less than equal to n naught, get pk such that u, a, b, fk, pk minus l, a, b, fk, pk is less than epsilon by 2 times n naught. Now you would have got that if one defines H as summation n equal to 0 to n naught minus 1 fk, then as we had noted earlier, u, a, b, h, p minus l, a, b, h, p is less than epsilon by 2 for P to be union pk, k equal to 0 to n naught minus 1. And finally, our f is just h plus g, and this is one step and this is the other step. First one holds for any p, and now we have got hold of one p for which the second one holds. So for this p, both these one hold, and that's it. So it will work for h plus this gap between UAB FP minus LAB FP is less than equal to the gap between G's and gap between H's, each one less than epsilon by 2, so the sum less than epsilon. So if you try to memorize the steps, let me assure you, you are going to have a mix-up. Something or the other you are going to go wrong. So the thing to do in such examples is that you have to only remember, or you may call it memorize, whatever, you have to remember the steps. That first, you choose a n naught large enough, so you choose a finite integer such that after that, all of them together contribute less than some epsilon by 2 to the u minus l. Then first finitely many you control in a different way.
Sir, I had a doubt, sir. Sir,
Yeah.
when we say that alpha is a bound of f, it means that f lies between alpha and minus alpha, right?
Wait, yeah.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So where did I use the phrase is a bound? Wait.
Alpha is bound, right? Of f. Alpha n is bound of fn, right?
Yeah, but I have precisely stated this somewhere. What do I mean by the bound? Yeah. See, mod fnx is less than equal to alpha n.
Okay, sir. I understand that.
Yeah.
Sorry, sir.
No. Don't be sorry. It's just reiterating that. That's all. So somehow I am used to this, that I write a formal notation, but while reading, I say that f alpha n is a bound for fn. Okay. For our brains, it is easier to digest and put together such expressions rather than an absolute value of fnx is less than equal to alpha n for all x in a to b for all n. Brains, it's much easier if you use English or any other language equivalently, but English, to say that, okay, alpha n is a bound of fn. Okay. It's understood that all our functions are over interval a to b, and our n is bit always, okay, here I should have said 0. So what we did just now is a very common trick when you want to deal with some infinite sums. You somehow show that for large n, after some point onwards, the later addition doesn't contribute much. And then the first few, you use the same tricks that you use for sum of finitely many. So what this yeah. So so we can think about term by term differentiation, term by term integration, all of that will follow from here. Okay. So how will the term by term differentiation thing will work? So let me use something other than capital F, small f. So suppose remember, when we derivative at the lower end point is always from above, and derivative at the upper end point is from below. So if this exists and n equal to 0, n equal to 1, you can, there's no issue. So let me write this carefully so that you understand what I'm writing. Okay. So we have started with just a sequence of functions. They're all differentiable. And now we are saying that the derivative of the nth one is take the supremum over all, then it is summation. then it's term by term differentiable, and the derivative of the sum is equal to sum of the derivatives. You can write it, yeah. So we can rewrite another one for just which involves only integration, Riemann integration. That if you have sequence of functions, all of them are Riemann integrable, and over an interval, and absolute value of nth one is less than equal to alpha n and summable, then the sum is also Riemann integrable. All three essentially can be, depends on what is given. The focus changes in our, in one case we are saying we can do term by term derivative, in another one we are saying that we can do term by term integration, but essentially the same thing. Crux is the condition that the derivatives, this one, if you're starting with derivation, our focus is differentiation, then we say that the nth derivative supremum thereof is summable. And if our focus is on Riemann integral, then we can say the opposite, that is supremum over x, nth one, sum over is finite, then we can do term by term Riemann integration. I hope you understand. Any question?
So if we say the derivative exists,
I couldn't hear you properly. Once again.
if we say that the derivative exists, doesn't this yellow condition follow from that?
Which condition?
This condition that the supremum is less than infinity.
No. Derivative exists. So we have not even said derivative is continuous. So the supremum may not be infinite of the derivative. And then we are saying further summation over n. So each derivative may exist, supremum may be there, but each supremum could be one. Right?
Okay. Yeah, yes.
So there are two parts here. First part is that the derivative for each nth one, the derivative is bounded. Okay. And then further the bounds are less than infinity. So it's like, you see, it depends on which way the work is. There is different way of casting the condition as I had put earlier. I had said that this one is less than equal to alpha n. The nth one is less than equal to alpha n, where summation alpha n is finite. Now I am saying sup over fnx in this absolute value, sup over supremum over x, mod fnx, summation over n is finite. Okay.
Yes, okay.
So this is the other thing, that just because you are familiar with one, if alternately similar, exactly the same condition but written with a different language or different notation, you should not get thrown off. That's why at one point I have used the condition as I have given here, and in the problem now, or in the last thing, I have put it differently. They are essentially the same. If mod hnx is less than equal to alpha n, where for every x and where summation alpha n is finite, these two statements are exactly the same. Yeah. So, any question or anything you are not familiar with what I have written and you would like me to go over it again? Since we have video lectures of earlier like notes, if while thinking you get question mark in your mind about something, you can go over that part again and you can ask me again also. I'm not going to say that just refer to my lecture dated so and so, my minute so and so. No, I will explain again. Okay. But you have to ask. If you don't ask, I won't know that what is your comfort, discomfort and about what, and then I'll just assume that you are followed at all. Okay. So the main thing is you have to put in efforts to go over what we have been doing in the class and see if you are not understanding something, ask me. Okay. Unfortunately, this online model puts a lot of restrictions. If it were a class, I would be staring at your faces. I will figure out that, maybe half the class has had this, has not followed this, and I will go over it again. But now that I don't have that capability. So you have to ask.
Sir.
Yeah.
Before we move on, could you just summarize what we've done so far? Because I followed most of it, but now I'm not able to remember everything that we've done today.
Today, okay.
Yeah, today. Like just the results that we've seen.
Yeah. So let's see. We can just first discussion was about improper integral. Okay. About improper integral and x power alpha dx, alpha bigger than -1. And we went over how would we, even if alpha is positive, how would we go about getting the number or answer for this? And then we moved on to the improper integral case when alpha is between 0 and -1. That is the first thing we did. That was brief, but just recalling because our last class ended with that. Then I quickly recall the power series thing that we have done. And one of you had asked that, okay, for power series, we know you can do term by term differentiation or term by term integration, but what can we answer when you are not having a power series, but just a sequence of functions where each one, what are the conditions when we can do term by term integration differentiation? So let me tell you that I'm not saying that these are the best conditions. This is not if and only if. Okay. I have just put up one set of conditions under which we can do. If for a given problem, this thing doesn't work, then we have to work around and see if it still works. Try other things. Okay. But this is one generic thing which covers power series all and beyond. And this was the thing which we spent most of our time, that you have continuous functions, bounded each one, and the bound of nth one is itself summable. Then Fnt is the integral, Riemann integral up to t of Fn, little fn, and then summation, that infinite sum is also works, and its derivative is also the infinite sum of little fn's. Okay. But one go we have done that, found conditions under which we can do term by term differentiation for infinite sum or term by term integration, Riemann integration for infinite sum. That is what we have done. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Yeah,
Yeah.
that I think that helped. Thank you.
So, like last time, I had put one problem which you all have done in class 12, like x power alpha integral, even for alpha positive, but not an integer. How do we do it? You had a formula in your mind, and I said we should think about how we will do it using the terms we have done now. So likewise, I'm fairly sure that in class 12, you would have been able to do something like this. Dx. There was no question that there is convergence exists, this, that, Riemann integral, improper Riemann, etc., nothing. But you already had rules. Okay, yeah. Milan pointed out, yeah, we did differentiation of inverse function and derivative. So I didn't do it today. We just recalled that we had done it earlier, and that was what was needed to do the first question about x power alpha. So, yeah. So we had used inverse function and derivatives and so on for log and exponential when we tried to do x power alpha. Yes. You are right, Milan. Yeah. So I know your name should be pronounced as Milan, so you may be wondering why I am saying Milan. Well, because 2.5 years, I mean, about a year, little over a year before the lockdown and all this problem started, I had actually been to Milan for a conference, the city Milan, and that was also one of the earliest place where the COVID hit outside China, and the first city where lockdown and all this started. And when it had come in the news, looking at it, I was horrified because the university where I had given lecture was one of the first institutes to be closed down across the globe. I had not even thought that we are going to face the same thing in India. I was just exchanging letters with my colleagues and friends in Milan, city of Milan, and about what they are up to, etc., etc. Yesterday, to someone, I was recalling this event, and the city name Milan was at the top of my head, and that's why I addressed you as Milan. I know your name should be pronounced as Milan, right? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So all right. So let's come to this integral x e power minus x squared dx. So some of you for sure, I guess Ayannath had, he has answered this question that yes, he remembers. Others remember this, right? What was the technique? How would you proceed?
Substitution.
Yeah. So now we have to see how can we bring in substitution in our framework. Okay. Because it's a tool which is very useful, and in solving problems, it is very much required. And how do we bring it in our framework? How do we justify what we did using what we have proven? As I had explained, not everything can be done, but large number of things can be done. And this is one of them which can be done. And so what does substitution imply? We substitute x square equal to t. And depending on how you were taught or how you wrote, you will either say that x dx is equal to dt, or you will say that
Sir, 2x dx.
oh yeah, x dx is equal to so there will be steps of this kind. Somewhere dx you have to replace by dt, and then either you just say 2x dx is dt, or you bring in dt by dx and write such things, right? But all these are just formal writings. You have not given any proofs of any such objects. Okay. Now, we don't want to introduce this notation, but we will do the following. One function is capital Ft, and then and right, this part is in our framework. This part was the yellow part is in our framework, green part is from memory or from what you have done in school. Okay, but this part, these two first ft and gx are just definitions. So g dash is 2x, that we have done, and let us define h to be f of gx. This is for t positive, and this is defined for all x, but we are only bothered with x positive and derivative, etc. Now, okay, so h dash is this. Therefore, and I didn't write here, if ft was defined like this, then f dash t was is e power minus t. So f dash e power gx is equal to and we are done. But for a factor of 2, which I could have brought in there, but doesn't matter, it is equal to e power so what do we get therefore? Integral 0 to, for now we must do finite, because eventually we want to do infinite interval, but first let's just do finite. Integral 0 to t e power minus x square 2x, sorry, not 2x, x square x dx is equal to half ht. H0 is probably 0 in the way I have defined. Oh, I have not even defined it. No, h at 0 is g of 0, g of 0 is 0, and f of 0 is also 0. So I don't have to worry about h0. Yeah. So this interval is just half of ht. And what is ht by our definition? Hx is equal to f of gx. So half and of course we know this integral, this is equal to 1 minus e power minus t. Ft is 1 minus 1 minus e power minus t. So gx is x square and f of x square is equal to half 1 minus e power minus x square. That's the answer. That's what you would have got when you did this substitution by the way you had done by dt, dx, etc., etc. Same thing, but now, yeah, x square is t or x square is y. Either way, x, t or y, whichever way you substitute, yes. So effectively, we have created framework which justifies or proves steps which you already knew. That has been incorporated in this theory. So next class, I will state exactly what is it that we have done for change of variable. Okay. We have done this. Wait, there is a problem here. 0 to t, in the end, I should not have x square. Okay, I'll state it correctly and state the statement. And eventually you want to go to infinity. So then we argue that the limiting thing as t goes to infinity will also work and get to the final answer for the given problem, x e power minus x squared dx. So
Sir, I think it should be f of t square.
yeah, so ht, yeah, this x should have been t square, yes. Now, limit of this as t goes to infinity is just half. And therefore, the answer to the problem we started with is half. And now we have used only things which we have proven in this course. Okay. So let us stop now. Unless you have some question, we can look at that.
Sir, this is about the term by term differentiation and integration.
Yeah.
Sir, I think I sort of got lost in the details at one point. What exactly did we do to show that? Sir, I follow that the with appropriate conditions, when we term by term integrate or term by term differentiate, that sum is defined. But I didn't get how we showed that one is a derivative of the other, one is the integral.
Okay, so okay. Okay, so maybe I didn't stress it enough, or maybe didn't even say that, but see, for the in the way we have shown that G is Riemann integrable when the finite sum, okay, it kind of incorporates that the integral is the sum of the finitely many terms, because each one we have, when U and L, the gap we write, that means that the integral is somewhere in between. Okay. And therefore,
okay. Okay.
From here it follows that, let me put that gap between summation k equal to 1 to m u a b that sum is less than epsilon. Okay. Now, integral of gk is lying in between these two terms, and then this says that the sum is integrable, and the integral is lying between some of the lower bounds and some of the upper bounds. So together we will get that the sum and the integral is between epsilon. The gap is between epsilon for every epsilon. Yeah, I should have stressed that here. So let me, let me go to the last page. Yeah.
Makes sense, sir. I got it for this case now. Yeah.
So carefully work out the finite case, then the other case will follow. Yeah, I should have stressed this point also. Yeah. Thanks.
So, but for the infinite case, we split it up into finite plus a lot of infinite, like the rest of the series.
Yeah.
How do we show it for there?
Okay, when we have that for n bigger than equal to n naught, so this will tell us that u a b f k minus l a b f k is less than summation over n equal to n naught to infinity. Upper and lower bounds of the integral itself is less than epsilon by 2. Okay.
Okay, I think I see it, sir.
So when we add, we will get that the gap between the sums of upper bounds and sums of lower bound is less than epsilon. And from there we will follow. Okay, let me try to write it out carefully and also send, but okay. And
Okay, sir.
I had put a message right in the beginning. Some of you may have joined later, but you can just check. And this afternoon, I'm going to give a talk which is primarily addressed to data science students. But some of you may be interested. It's role of statistics in the era of big data. Those who are interested can join the same YouTube link, same Zoom link. Okay, but it's entirely optional, nothing to do with this course.
So when, sir, is it?
1:30 afternoon today.
Oh, okay, okay. So this link.
Yes, this link.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
So actually, before we wind up, if you have time, sir, still about this about term by term differentiation and all. A related question I had is, can we does some part of the fundamental theorem of calculus apply to these power series? Can we do something like that also?
I mean, this statement can be put in terms of fundamental theorem, but I don't see additional points there. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I at least I don't, but maybe there is something I don't know.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. I think now it's making more sense. I think I'll go over it on my own and I think I'll get it. Thank you, sir.
All right. Bye.